Good morning. I want to talk today about 4 words. Best work, best life. There are a few things I think I know about you if you work in the modern workplace today. And one is that you probably work a lot. How many of you would say, I work a lot, I spend a lot of time at the workplace? When I ask leaders that question, the typical answer is something like 40 or 50 hours a week. When someone says that, I always see a scoff. I see somebody who's like, that must be nice. And they start to take pride, and a bidding war breaks out. And over here, I get to 70 and 75, and somebody who is both simultaneously exhausted, miserable, and proud says, I work 80 hours a week. That's not what I'm talking about. Back up. If you're going to work for 40 years, you're going to work a whole lot more than 80 hours in 1 week. People who work full-time jobs typically are working 80 to 100,000 hours. That is enough time to polish you into a diamond 10 times over or grind you into dust. Today, we see a lot of dust piles around the office, and I think we can change that. Best work, best life can change that. Now, there's something else I know about you, and that is that you probably work in an organization that is trying to grow. How many of you would say, my company's trying to grow? Yeah, right. So when we introduce growth into an organization, which, by the way, that is the native language of CEOs. If you ever talk to somebody in the C-suite and you don't bring up how you're contributing to growth, you probably had them start tuning out after about 60 to 90 seconds. They're constantly thinking, how do we grow our organization? How do we grow our impact? Well, there's a third thing I know, and that is if you work in a growth organization, you probably have tension among your leaders. And that tension exists because they're trying to figure out how do we do what's best for the organization and simultaneously take care of the needs of our people. That tension right now is getting to a point maybe we've never seen before. And the reason is, if you think about, I need to grow revenue. Okay, every time we talk about growing our revenue, we are sending a message to our employees, and that message is, what you did last year, which nearly killed you, is no longer enough. We need more this year. Well, growing revenue for revenue's sake is not really that productive. We also need to have bottom line growth. And when we go to grow profitability, well, that means we're probably going to have to do something like manage our expenses. Now, if you work in the HR part of the world, you might say, well, we also need to make smart investments in our people. We've got to retain our people, and retaining people costs money. So every time you're in a growth organization that needs more people or needs to retain the ones they have, you typically have a stress on profitability. Leaders, you say that our people are our greatest asset. CFOs, what are our people? They are our greatest expense. And every time we spend money on trying to retain our people, we're increasing those expenses and we're hurting profitability. So there is an inherent tension inside every single growth organization today. Now, best work, best life may be a solution. Why? If we will focus on the growth and success of our people, well, actually we can solve all 4 problems. See, when you focus on making sure someone is growing and they're successful, they're less likely to leave. Your retention problems go away. I like to say, forget retaining your people. Just grow them. Turns out people who are experiencing success are less likely to burn out. Turns out people who are experiencing success also drive fantastic business results. So rather than there being a constant tension between the needs of the business and the needs of the people, embrace this one need of your people. Make sure they're growing and successful. Now, there has never been a time when that's been more important. And that is because we're in this thing called the war for talent. How many people know when the war for talent was coined? A lot of people think it was 2020. Well, that's kind of convenient. After 2020, with the pandemic, we saw voluntary resignations go up 55% in 1 year. Record levels of people quitting their jobs. That's not when the war for talent started. The war for talent was an idea coined by a group at McKinsey in 1997. 25 years ago, they pulled the fire alarm. And they said, look, we know, based on demographics, that we are looking at labor shortages in the future, particularly a crisis in leadership. How did they know that 20-some years in advance? Well, because we don't make new leaders. We make babies. Look at how many babies are born in any given year, and you know how many people are going to enter the workforce 18, 20, 22, 25 years later. Well, they saw the data in 1980. 1980 was the first census where we saw the baby boomers actually old enough to have kids and not replacing themselves. By the time they got to 1997, when they were doing this work, that die was cast. All of the boomers had had their kids in our country, and we saw a smaller generation. So they knew we're going to have more consumers than we have workers. Now, what they didn't know is that it would get infinitely worse. If you haven't heard of the demographic drought, add that to your reading list. I suggest that perhaps you also maybe indulge in a glass of wine while you read it, because it may cause you to freak out. There is almost no good news in the demographic drought. It says we are looking at a future without workers. As many people are freaked out about generative AI, I'm telling you, it actually may be extremely helpful because it's promising huge productivity gains at a time where we are going to need more people. Unfortunately, if we look forward, that may not be enough. The demographic drought actually cited other issues, like the fact that the greatest generation of wealth producers are now passing down $90 trillion in assets to their children and grandchildren. That may not all be coming to you, but as a population, that's a pretty large incentive to not necessarily have to go to work every day. Now, they also point out that sentiment around work has changed. I don't know any young people anymore who said, I'll give you 40 years of my life for a watch. Their grandparents would have taken great pride in that. Today they would say, I'll give you about 4 minutes to show me how this job matters, and if you will show an interest in me and help me grow, I'll stay. If you don't, I need to find someplace that is willing to invest in me and is going to do something that matters. A lot of our leaders today think, oh, young people don't want to work today. Do you really think they want to switch jobs every year? Do you think they want a new 401k and a new dentist and a new doctor and a new paycheck and a new route to work? Do you think they want to take a risk on getting a worse boss than they have now? No. I would consider them courageous. They are willing to leave if they don't see that someone's willing to invest in their growth, help them be successful, and do something that matters. Let's remember that. That's a really important part of what we're going to talk about next, because I really think the rules of work have changed. For most of our adult lives, the golden rule of work was, well, the person with the gold makes the rules. This goes back centuries. Well, when you're in a talent war, that changes. If you were a CFO and you came up in your very first corporate finance class as a baby CFO said, whatever you do, don't run out of cash. If you run out of cash, you're dead. Today, you need to learn a new rule. If you run out of talent, you're dead, and your cash may not help you. How many of you have ever left a job that you think, I don't think I would want to go back there? Most of us. Now, I want you to imagine that that boss that you worked for, who you left, you say you left the job, you probably left him or her, but that boss is calling and saying, I want you back. So let's bury the hatchet. I want you to report to work on Monday. Forget whatever you're currently doing. I'll pay your current wage and I'll even add some. How much more would you have to make to go back to work for that boss? I like to jokingly ask, is that 3% or 4? 4 or 5? And some people start shaking their heads saying, they don't have that much money. That is right. You poison the talent well by giving somebody a horrible work experience, which, by the way, is disproportionately affected by their last day. We need to be very thoughtful about how we treat people when they leave our companies. But you poison that well, they're never coming back. Not only can't you hire that person, you're not going to hire their neighbors, you're not going to hire their friends, you're not going to hire their kids. When we have bad employment experiences, we have a tendency to kind of not keep that to ourselves. So we need to be really thoughtful when there's a war for talent. Now, how long do we expect this war for talent to last? Most people typically think it's 3 to 7 years. That's reasonable, because our economic cycles usually run on something like a 7 to 9 year cycle, and every few years there will be a little shock to the system. Labor markets will get tight when things are really good. It'll loosen up, and it'll be really easy to find people when the economy's not as good. But remember, there's something else at work here. This is not an economic cycle we're talking about. This is a demographic cycle. These things happen much more slowly. The demographic cycle is expected to continue with lower birth rates, lower interest in committing to employers, and lower labor participation rates for the next 30 to 50 years. The war for talent is basically what it's going to be like to do business for the rest of our lives. So, how do you win people? And is it worth it? Well, let's first address, is it worth it? If you're a CFO out there, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, if I've got to give in to the needs of all these people to get them to stay or come work for us, it's going to cost us a fortune. I want to challenge your thinking there. I didn't grow up in HR, I was a mechanical engineer, and so I like to use analogies with machines sometimes. People are not machines, I know that. But I want you to imagine a race car. If you gave in to the needs of a race car, would it go more slowly? No. Actually, when you give in to the needs of a race car, that's how it performs at its very best. So what are the needs of a race car? Fuel, tires. Fuel and tires are the two most common things I hear about. Yes, if you don't do that, the thing will stop working within an hour. But we know a race car needs more than fuel and tires. Occasionally, it needs to be actually pulled off the track. It needs an oil change. I would say for people, that means like we need a good night's sleep. You got to turn it off from time to time. You need to do heavy maintenance. You need to take that thing apart. You need someone who loves the race car if that race car is going to perform at its best. Now, is it worth it? If you invest in the needs of a race car, well, actually, it can win championships. It can perform at its very peak. Does the same hold true for people? McKinsey looked at a study that said, what's the difference between average performers and top performers in companies today? And there is a performance differential. How much do you think that is? Do you think the high performers are 10% more productive? 25% more productive? Well, they found it was 400% more productive. There's a huge difference when you get people producing at their potential. You get massive, massive returns to the organization. Now, there was a problem with this particular study. Actually, the first one was not done by McKinsey. McKinsey did another one. Why? Well, because the first study included professional athletes, actors, and politicians. I don't know how many of you employ those folks. But when they took them out, they thought the results might be different, and they were. Turns out, when you focus on what they called modern complex workers, these are people who deal with people and information. The multiple goes up to 8 times. People performing at their very best are 8 times more productive than people performing at their average. Now you might say, Travis, I don't know if that's true. Not all of our people are these extraordinary high performers. I mean, where do you find such a person? And I would challenge you. Look into the heart of every single person you meet. You will find a high performer. Now, Dr. Maslow, he suggested this back in 1954, if you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And one of the things that he suggested is that every human being has these different types of needs. But notice at the top of those needs, he called it self-actualization. Every person has a desire to achieve their potential. When you find somebody who's not, well, that just could be because they don't know it's in there. No one's ever showed it to them. Or maybe it could be because some of their lower needs are not being met. They don't have a sense of safety. They don't have a sense of belonging. No one's ever cared about them. But there is a desire inside them. Now, some people took issue with Dr. Maslow's work, and they actually argued and said, you know, Dr. Maslow, I think some people can achieve their potential without all those lower needs being met. That is great news. If somebody can achieve their potential, and that doesn't mean they have to have a perfect life, that is great news. Now, something else some people said is, Dr. Maslow, your pyramid here seems very selfish. It's about your physiological needs and your needs for esteem and belonging and self-actualization. And you know what? I think people are better than that. I think some people actually want to be involved with something bigger than themselves. He agreed. 1970, I don't know why I wasn't taught this in school, but there's a new pyramid. He actually put something above the pyramid. It's called self-transcendence. And he actually totally agreed, and he said there is a need inside of people to be more than just really good at what they do. They need it to matter. Inside every person is a need to contribute to the needs of others. That is really good news. So now I want you to get curious. How do I tap into those needs? Well, we have to understand what's on the hearts and minds of people. What's on the hearts and minds of most people today is money, their job, and their health. If we look at the stressors in the life of an American today, by far the biggest stressor is money. You've probably heard these studies, you've probably seen them, and it might actually ring home for you. Most people cannot afford a $1,000 unexpected expense without having to charge it. Most people don't have enough money to retire. One study showed that a third of people have $0 for retirement, and that's what they really drew attention to, and I take exception to that because of all the different buckets they looked at, only the top bucket, which was 13% of people, had more than $300,000. That means 87% of people don't have $300,000 saved for retirement. And you say, well, 300 sounds like a lot. This year, the cost of health care alone for a couple in retirement, $350,000. That's what is expected over the course of the rest of their lives, not thankfully in 1 year. But what that says is if people really knew how much it costs to retire, they would realize, I won't be able to afford my health care. I won't be able to afford to eat. I won't be able to afford to live inside. That's terrifying. Right now, they're thinking, I can't afford to pay my credit card bill. Now, we happen to be in an election cycle, and I've already heard it talked about. Trillions of dollars of economic debt, and you're going to see some chart somewhere that says, what's your share? You take trillions, divide by millions, and you end up with big numbers. We all have another 100 grand to tack onto our personal debt that is our country's debt. That's not going to make anybody sleep any better. So we got huge economic stress. What about the job? Most people, unfortunately, are not engaged at work. We've known this. There's a lot of talk about, like, is employee engagement up this year? Is it down a point? Unfortunately, it is down a couple points. But if you look back over all the measurements that Gallup has done over the last 23, 24 years, find me 1 year where most people were engaged. That year doesn't exist. Employee engagement has been flat and pretty lousy for as long as they've measured it. And it's leading to something else. Half of Americans are willing to take another job. The most recent data Gallup found was 48% of people said, I would be open to another job, or I'm actively looking. And for leaders, that freaks us out. You mean half my team could walk away this year? This is where I want you to change your perspective. You create a workplace where people come and they do their best work and they live their best lives, half of America will want to come work for you. You do not need to worry about not being able to attract enough talent to grow your organization. There's lots of people out there. The challenge is that there aren't enough to go around. And so I would challenge you, if you want to win the war for talent, create a workplace that hour by hour, day by day, year by year, people get stronger. We talk about these three things: margin, mission, mastery. Number one, you need to take an interest in your people and find out, can they breathe? If they don't have any margin in their life, in their physical life, in their schedule, in their relationships, or in their pocketbook, it's really hard for them to care about your organization's goals. Number one, we have to create organizations where people have margin. Number two is mission. Why is your business in business beyond making money? Money is like blood to a human. If we don't have blood, we die. Do I live to make blood? No. Organizations do not live to make money. They live for a purpose, and they need money to carry it out. Are you talking about that greater purpose with your organization? Because Dr. Maslow would tell you, if you do, it's going to activate the desire of someone to help you. I would also tell you, if you're talking about mission, you need to go beyond the organization's mission. You need to actually get interested in your people. Turns out when people learn their own values, they engage more at work than if they know the company's values. Are you doing an exercise like that? It takes about 5 minutes. Simply show people a list of values and ask them, which ones speak to you? Do you know what you value? If we could help you figure out what you value, you're more likely to come to work fully engaged. It's free. It takes a few minutes. It takes a mindset and an intentionality that we need to help people figure out what success means to them. All right, the final piece is mastery, and I think this is the piece we kind of have down. I don't know anybody who goes to work and tries to make it worse, but they're so busy trying to make it better that they're forgetting the fact that people can't breathe and they don't know why we're doing it. So margin, mission, mastery. Focus on creating a place where people can do their best work, live their best lives. Focus on the success and growth of your people. And I think a lot of your business challenges are going to resolve themselves. Thank you.